At this time where there were no radio, no television, there was still a sort of mystery about a great man, and nobody of my generation would dare just disturb them, which is not the case actually, where sometimes someone telephoned just to know how I spelled my name. And then during the war, when Debussy wrote his sonata for viola, harp, and flute, it happened that regularly I was making chamber music at some friend's house where we tried this sonata with a hardwood harpist and flutist. And then his publisher, Monsieur Jacques Durand, heard about that and asked me if I would like to give the first performance as a violist of Debussy's sonata. It was in 1916, I think, during the war. Of course, I was extremely excited about this project, and Mr. Durand told me, I'm going to take an appointment, and you'll go at Debussy's house, and he will give you all the tempi. And of course, I went there with my heart beating very hard, and I saw the master, which I admired so much. He was already sick of this dreadful sickness, which brought 2 years later his death. He was very pale with a little shawl on his shoulders and his hands trembling on the piano, and with this extraordinary sonority that he had, he played for me twice his sonata on the piano, that I could get all the little details in the tempi, in the rallentendo, etc. And of course, I didn't tell him that I was composing myself, because at this period we were more shy than young composers might be now, although at this period I was already composing the Coephorus. But for Debussy, I was a young violist, full of deference and respect. After so many years, I keep for Debussy the same admiration, the same tenderness, the same love. I have been very impressed once by an article that Schoenberg wrote about Gustav Mahler, which is published now in his book Style and Ideas. I was very much impressed because Schoenberg said that he loved every note that Mahler has written. And he explained that music is a question of love. If you love a composer, you must love everything. And he said that a lot of people make some objections about the Mahler's music, that sometimes people said it was vulgar, sometimes they say it was too long, etc., etc. And he managed to explain that that was not true, and then he insisted on this question of total love for a certain music. Then I thought, well, I have a musician for which I have this absolute passionate love without restriction, and evidently Debussy is of this type. And as the years pass, my admiration still grows. About Ravel, it's quite a different question. I have met Ravel in 1912, I suppose. I had just finished to write my first piano and violin sonata, which is a work that I don't like, actually. And if I find it in a friend's house, I try to hide it under my vest and I tear it out when I go out. But at this period in 1912, I had just written it, and one of my friends who knew Ravel told me, well, we are going to go and see Mr. Ravel and you'll play him your sonata. I must say that Ravel was extremely nice, and he helped me to get the first performance of this work in 1913 at the Société Musicale Indépendante. After that, I didn't see him very much, and then the war came in 1914. But I met him during this time. I was not in the army because of my bad health. And each time I met him, he was always very kind. But I suppose that he felt, or he knew, that I didn't have for his music the same love that I had for Debussy. I think it is because Ravel's music, which is so marvelously done, so extraordinarily orchestrated, doesn't correspond to the kind of sensibility and sensitivity or tenderness that I like in music. It's more controlled, perhaps a little drier also, a little more conventional. And when the first performance of La Valse was given, I was at that time a critic in one of the music papers. I remember that I wrote a very impertinent review with all the impertinence that young people can have and must have. I just said that it was some Saint-Saëns for Russian ballet. I still think it is, but I suppose that Ravel was a little shocked by this statement, but he never showed it. When the group of six was formed, absolutely by haphazard, because after the First World War, a critic, Mr. Collet, wrote an article called "The Five Russians and the Six French." As a matter of fact, he took our sixth name absolutely by haphazard. We could have been as well 7 or 8 or 4, but no, he chose sixth name, and that was how the birth of the sixth was done. At this moment, we were very strongly against Impressionism. We wanted that the French music become more clear, simpler also, more vigorous, and all the complications of the followers of Debussy meet with our complete disapproval, although we had only love for Debussy. And Ravel also was, of course, one of the composers we criticize the most. I must say that he was extremely fair, because when he was traveling and he was asked by news critics interviews what he thought of the young generation, he was extremely generous and always spoke of my work very nicely, I must say, and it was almost a little embarrassing for me, because I couldn't give him back this nice appreciation. You might be surprised that fighting Impressionism, I would always keep this deep love for the music of Debussy. As a matter of fact, the quality of Debussy is different. First of all, he had found a new language. Everything, as I told you already, came from his heart, really. And also, his human qualities are always in his music. In his followers, of course, there is a conventionality of language which we don't like. When I say we, I mean all the six at this moment. And very often the Impressionist music seems to be scattered in pieces and go away like smoke or fireworks. In Ravel, it was far away from me, because his music has this sort of preciosity, which I don't personally like very much. But later, I'm glad to say that there have been two works in which I have found some real deep beauty. It is the concerto for the left hand and orchestra. In this work, I think it's the first time that there is a real deep, dramatic sentiment in Ravel music. And also in L'Enfant et le Sortilège, which is a work that I don't like at all. But the last page is moving to tears. We have very often discussed music with Ravel on a very frank way. I remember once he came to have lunch at my house very soon after the first performance of Satie's Socrates, which I adored. And he didn't like it at all. He didn't understand it, that's all. And he told me that he could never agree with a work which for him was so poor of invention, poor of everything. This sort of very pure line and very simple harmonies are very far away from the Ravelian aesthetic. And that's probably the reason why he went away from this work without feeling it and going inside of it. I must say that when Ravel became sick, we became more close one from the other. I remember once he has been in a kind of hospital in Switzerland, and he was very unhappy there. We were traveling by car in Switzerland, and I telephoned him. I want to see his reaction, if he should like to see me or not. Immediately he said, "Oh, come, come." Then we went to fetch him. I was with my wife, and we took him to lunch and make a little motor ride all around the lake of Geneva. And at this moment, his terrible disease was beginning to increase. He told us, "I am fetching all the time my words," to which we always said, "But we too, of course, we always don't find a word." He said, "Yes, but it's also gestures." For instance, this morning, said he, "I didn't know the gesture how to make my necktie." And after this very sad day that we spent together, I remembered that the first signs I saw of this disease were already a few years before. When my child was born, I decided to have a little autograph book made for him. And once I had to conduct one of my works in a concert where Ravel conducted also. It was a concert given at the Salle Pleyel, and the program was only composed of works dedicated and commissioned by the Princess Edmond de Polignac. And Ravel was conducting the Pavane pour une enfant défunte. And going to the rehearsal, I had the idea just to take this book of autograph and to ask him to sign it. And then he seemed panicked. And he said, "Well, I can't do it now." I said, "But my dear, just put your name." And then he went into the artist room. He put this booklet on the table, took his pen, looked a little strange. And then he told me, "My dear, I'm very, very sorry, I can't." Of course, it was one of the first signs. He didn't remember how to sign his name, which was a real awful impression that we got. And just a few days before he went to the hospital for this frightful operation from which he died, there was a little farewell party at a friend's house, and he was very sweet with everybody, but he couldn't coordinate anymore his gestures. And going away, he shook hands with everybody, but his hand was never in front of the hand of the person he wished to say goodbye, and it was always out too much on the left or too much on the right, and I had to move to catch his hand that he presented on the left side and not in front of me. And after that, we learn about his death.
That was Darius Milhaud with memories of Maurice Ravel and Debussy. The recording was made in the late 50s.